What's up, YouTube? It's Nerdy, and welcome back to the Transmissions Draft League, season number 4. We are here to recap the third week of season number 4, our first week of cross-divisional matchups. It was a very fun one, a lot of really close games in my opinion, a couple of them that were pretty one-sided, but overall, we kind of saw how every division is really still up for grabs. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into the recap, predictions, and then take a look around the league for what has been going on since the last recap. So in the last video, of course, we did make some predictions, and the streak continues as we went 4-2 yet again. We got 4 of these correct and 2 of them incorrect. And I will talk about the 2 that we got incorrect when we get there. But let's start with the Charge Beams versus the Flareons. This is a 3-game set, mostly due to a little bit of luck. I wouldn't say that it entirely determined the outcome of the game, but certainly it had a huge impact on it, as JKG had an unfortunate hurricane connecting in the sun, which of course is a coin flip, which then caused a confusion, which I believe is only a 20% chance on hurricane. And then for 3 turns in a row, Blood Moon ended up hitting itself in confusion, which I know was only a quarter chance each time. That's pretty bad odds to actually have all of those things happen. But of course, I do think still that Celadon was in a decent position without that luck. It just kind of accentuated the outcome of that first game. For the next 2 games, though, of course, JKG put the pedal to the metal and understood that with a speed advantage already, no tailwind was necessary, and got the KOs when he needed it without a second thought. And of course, did end up winning that game. Of course, if you take out that first game, it is pretty dominant by JKG in my opinion, and I think it kind of accentuates to me why offensive teams need to play the way that I've been talking about all season, which is if you give your opponent an in to the game where luck can be involved, there's a lot that can go wrong for offensive teams. However, offensive teams also have the ability to completely remove luck from the equation, like in games 2 and 3 when JKG's team just outsped and KO'd everything without even giving it a second thought. This is especially true when, of course, some of the less experienced coaches don't use things like Protect. Offensive teams really thrive in an environment like that, where when there's a lack of Protect, if you are the offensive team, you are pretty favored to win because now you don't even have to make reads. That being said, I do think that we should start seeing this more from a couple of the offensive teams, and I think this is just a taste of what JKG is capable of. We are only 3 weeks into the season, so of course there is still more than half of the games left to be played, but I do think that he's got to start turning it around at this exact moment. Otherwise, playoffs are still pretty far away. Next up, we had the Season 4 Sweepers versus the New York Poke Rangers. And I did predict this upset, and boy, was it an interesting one. I thought that Fluttermane was actually going to be a bigger factor in this match. Ended up not being. It seems like the Poke Rangers have kind of understood that Fluttermane has a lot of eyeballs on it because it is that big 20-point Pokemon. And in my opinion, I think they've strayed away from it a little too much. In my opinion, I do think that it is kind of like that Ogerpon piece where in a couple of matchups, it is completely fine to just be Terra Fairy with Choice Specs or Life Orb or Booster Energy. Just put a bunch of holes in your opponent's team and clean up the aftermath, if there is any aftermath to clean up. I think this was a matchup where they could have gotten away with doing that. 616, however, puts up 3 wins in 3 weeks against 2 easier matchups and 1 matchup where this kind of puts him really far ahead for playoffs. I do think that now the Sweepers have got to be a favorite for the playoffs. Like I said, there's still half the season left to play, but we have seen teams make the playoffs on just 3 wins. I don't know if that's going to be enough this season, but you put yourself in a really good spot where 1 or 2 more wins with 4 weeks left to get them puts you in the playoffs. And I think that that's really great news for a team that honestly has one of the easier schedules of the season. Getting 1 win where you had the most difficulty is obviously really good. Next up, we had the Bitbreakers versus the Cretaceous Draco Meteors. This was a very one-sided 2-game set, which I think kind of came down to the fact that Cresselia did not have the mental herb. There was some discussion that it was planned on being on Cresselia, however, did not actually show up to the game with it. And of course, that just meant that the Draco Meteors offense went completely unchallenged as they were able to shut down Trick Room without even thinking about it, and the game ended really quickly. I think the other thing that this highlights is just how oppressive Dale's team is offensively. As if we needed any more proof that it was such. I do think that Dale is about to come into the harder stretch of the season. Of course, I do think that at least 3 of the next 4 matchups are the hardest that he has to play all season. But again, just like 616, having 3 wins in the first half of the season does mean that you are 1 or 2 wins away from actually making the playoffs, and there are definitely more than 1 winnable games in the next 4 weeks. So this team should probably continue to roll, and definitely a threat in the playoffs when we get there. Next up, we have the first game that I got incorrect, which was my game versus the Infernal Infernapes. Big Bot, of course, definitely showed up and showed out, had a really good team for this set, and honestly probably could have ended the set in 2 games. A little bit of a throw at the end of game 2 to let us back in, and I definitely think that we had some misplays that, given the fact that Big Bot let us back into the series, we probably should have capitalized on it. Definitely a couple of moments where I think we were second guessing our own team building. The biggest thing for me though is that when the B-Wares have won, it's been dominant. When we've lost, it's been incredibly close, and in some scenarios probably should have gone the other way. I think this is one of the scenarios where my own play did cost us a lot, but I definitely think that this was a scenario where we could easily turn this around and be 3-0, which does give me a lot of hope because we are still in that 3rd place spot for the playoffs, and although we have played 3 really tough matches, the rest of the schedule doesn't necessarily get that much easier, but there are some winnable games in there where the Bears can probably turn this around. It is unfortunate, of course, going into the final half of the season, knowing that you probably have to win at least 3 of the next 4 in order to make playoffs. But I do think that we're capable of that, and I think if we turn it up a little bit, the B-Wares can certainly churn out 4 wins in 4 weeks, which of course is the expectation that I put on myself because this is a great team, and we definitely should be able to do that. Next up, we had the 10-star team versus the Sunset Rose Meowsticks. This was the other game that I got incorrect this week, where Tensor ended up doing exactly what I thought would happen in game 1, where Golden Go was absolutely dominant. And of course, all of the support that Rose was able to put forward just could not interact with Tensor's team in a way that was effective. However, it definitely seems like Tensor has a bit of a struggle adapting when his opponent adapts. Rose definitely put out a very great game plan in games 2 and 3, where in my opinion, I don't know if this is going to work versus every coach, but this level of adaptability and planning does mean that a team that is a little bit under the power curve, in my opinion, still has the ability to show up to basically any match, and is a big reason why they are in the playoff hunt that they are in. They've beaten two really solid teams and, of course, gone up against a juggernaut, but they are still in that running where they have 2 out of 3 wins so far. It's only going to require 2 to 3 more wins out of the next 4 weeks, which is certainly a good place to be in. As for Tensor, um, first week was basically a coast. The second week, you kind of got away with a lot. And in the third week, I'd say a little bit of inexperience showed, which is odd coming from a grand finalist Victor. But of course, I do think that Tensor can turn this around. And like I said, this is a great team. Some of the cracks are definitely starting to show, where I think this team is going to heavily rely on Golden Go going forward. And any team that can shut that Pokemon down is definitely favored against them. Of course, I do think that Tensor has some of the best support around Golden Go that we've seen, so definitely the ability to combat that, but I think it'll require Tensor to actually build unique teams every week and adapt to his opponent's own strategy going forward. And the final game of the week, we had the Dream Park Duo Blades versus the Booming Swamperts, which was yet again a very one-sided 2-game set, where the Booming Swamperts completely took over with their 2 better Pokemon in the matchup, Scrafty and Heatran, whereas the Duo Blades, like I said with Tensor, have been bringing the same sets that they have had for weeks 1 and 2, which are already pretty odd sets that didn't really fit VGC and just didn't make an impact. Now there is some changes that we will have to talk about at the end of this, but the Duo Blades are in a tough spot. They've got 0 wins so far, not even a game win, and it is kind of putting them in a spot where the team needs a complete overhaul, and in my opinion, they probably need to learn a little bit more about VGC before they're ready to compete. So I do hope that they turn it around, and this is where it's got to start. Unfortunately, they are in a position where they need 4 wins, and now they also need some other teams to lose in order for them to make playoffs, but they are technically not mathematically eliminated, so it is possible, but I do think that they will have a hard time going forward. Speaking of the changes that I mentioned, there was a lot of trades between the beginning and end of week 3. The first one being that the Charge Beams ended up dropping Reuniclus for Uxie. In my opinion, this is actually a pretty good trade for the Charge Beams. The thing that the Charge Beams are missing, in my opinion, is not damage whatsoever. This team has really good high-end damage. What they are missing is consistency in their modes. And in my opinion, their better of the 2 modes is Hard Trick Room. Torkoal is the king of Trick Room, and Ursaluna Blood Moon is obviously really, really strong. And being able to have a much better supportive Pokemon for Trick Room, at least in my opinion, means that this team has a little bit more that it can threaten against other teams. We'll have to see if this allows JKG to turn the ship around, so to speak. They are not in last place, and they are within striking distance of the playoffs. Like I said, there's still 4 weeks left to play, but I do think that it's going to require them winning almost all, if not most, of their really tough matchups that they have left. And of course, given that the Charge Beams dropped her Reuniclus, very briefly after that, your Manchester Beavers ended up picking up Reuniclus by dropping both Duosion and Haxorus, 2 Pokemon that we haven't used this season, basically allowing us to just upgrade for Reuniclus. And the second Pokemon that we added was, for 2 points, Rampardos. Now, obviously Rampardos is a bit of a meme. It is a Pokemon with 165 base attack that also has Sheer Force, that also has the ability to run things like Rock Slide and Head Smash, and it hits so incredibly hard that it should be a good Pokemon. And that's kind of the idea with picking it up as our 2-point Pokemon. The idea is that it's only ever going to be able to click 1 or 2 really strong moves. It might be able to do more than that because we do have a pretty solid Trick Room mode. But if you're just getting a 1-hit KO out of a 2-point Pokemon, or potentially 2 one-hit KOs because it does learn a couple of spread moves. That is actually really great value out of Rampardos, in my opinion. But even if it doesn't show up to any games, it's more so to enable us to pick up the upgrade that is Reuniclus. Now, of course, Reuniclus was originally the Pokemon we wanted on the team rather than Duosion, and on paper, it's not that big of an upgrade. Duosion and Reuniclus actually have the same special attacking stat, and both have the ability to use Magic Guard and the Life Orb. The reason why Reuniclus is much better is because it has the consistent ability to set up Trick Room even in the face of pretty substantial offense. On top of that, Reuniclus still makes use of our Psychic Terrain really effectively, but is not wholly reliant on it, as it can be a multitude of different Calm Mind sets or other ways of putting out damage, which in my opinion does make our wider range of strategies even more effective. So I am very excited to see Reuniclus. Hopefully we'll see that soon. But yeah, there is a couple more trades here. For the Booming Swamperts, we did see them dropping Scrafty briefly before this game in Week 3 happened, which of course does mean that it was not available for this Week 3 match, but they did end up dropping Scrafty for Kilowattrel. In my opinion, this is a kind of whatever trade. I do think that getting rid of yet another 4 times weakness was pretty solid, but Scrafty actually was a really good Pokemon in my opinion on that team. And the ability to create a lot of space for your already great Pokemon does kind of hurt to lose. That being said, Kilowattrel is also a really great Pokemon, and I do think it kind of expands the fast mode that this team can go for. I'm not 100% certain if they're going to be making great use out of it, but I do think that it is something that they'll still be able to influence the game with. Also, from this matchup, we did see the Duo Blades finally making a change, and in my opinion, actually grabbing an identity. Now, I do think that this team will still be flawed after this, but these were good trades. The Duo Blades ended up dropping both Regieleki and Drifblim, and ended up picking up Regigigas and Galarian Weezing. In my opinion, these are 2 great Pokemon. Galarian Weezing, of course, is amazing disruption against basically every team. Both Misty Surge and Neutralizing Gas are pretty strong versus a wider range of teams, and Regigigas, in my opinion, is the better of the 2 between Slacking and Regigigas at actually making use of Neutralizing Gas. This is for the reason that Regigigas isn't 100% useless without the Neutralizing Gas. It does become a support Pokemon when otherwise using the Neutralizing Gas, it becomes a much more offensive Pokemon, but at least Regigigas gets some other things. Now, like I said, I don't think this solves the team altogether, but it is a very nice upgrade. And I do think that this means that the team will actually have some strategies to throw at other teams. So we'll actually see if this works for Week 4. The final trades being made for this Week 3 was the Calgary Flareons ended up dropping Rotom Frost and Dunsparce, and they ended up picking up Kingdra and Torracat. Now, in my opinion, this is a pretty good trade. Neither Rotom Frost or Dunsparce ended up getting any use, and in my opinion, Rotom Frost was probably the biggest fraud on the team, so being able to switch that out for 2 very good Pokemon, in my opinion, is really nice. The only gripe I have about this is that Torracat probably puts Qwilfish out of a job. It's so much better at the Eviolite plus Intimidate thing that Qwilfish is probably out of a job. Potentially we can see that Pokemon get replaced, but even still, Torracat is an excellent addition to a team that has multiple setup Pokemon that will definitely benefit from all the space that Torracat gives them. And on top of that, Kingdra is also a beneficiary of that space because Kingdra really likes being able to work its magic in the rain, but it's not necessarily wholly reliant on it. I do think that Kingdra loses a lot of its teeth without the rain, but that is still really nice to have. So good trades overall for basically every team. I am very happy with all of the trades made so far. And as a quick reminder to anybody watching this video, the end of week 4 is the trade deadline if you plan on making any upgrades to your team. March 18th is the final day, and in fact, on March 18th, rosters will be locked, and no trades will be accepted after that point. So make sure that by Tuesday, March 17th, you end up finishing and finalizing any trades if you plan on making them. Remember, each team only gets 3 of these, so if you have already used some, make sure that you still have enough to actually make the trades that you are planning on. Speaking of week 4, we do of course have some predictions for what I think is going to happen. Hopefully we can break our 4-2 streak every week and get a little bit better on the predictions this week. So of course for our game we are going to back ourselves yet again. Of course I do think that we are in a position to kind of turn it around and turn it up and hopefully start marching towards the playoffs. We are still holding a playoff spot thanks to our really dominant week 1 win. But I do think that it's going to require us to continue putting on the gas to finalize our playoff spot. For the Bit Breakers versus the 10-star team, I'm actually going to take the Bit Breakers here. I do think that Golden Go can be an issue for this Bit Breakers team, but I think that that's the only Pokemon that gives them trouble, and it's not like they have no answers. I think that Calm Mind can definitely find a way through this Golden Go. And then I think that Tensor honestly runs out of gas. Azumarill is not very good in the matchup. And overall, I think that Calm Mind can give Tensor's team a lot of trouble. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a one-sided affair. I do think that Tensor has the ability to make it a much closer game. But like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a 2-0 set in favor of the Bit Breakers. Finally, in the Dark Division, of course, we have the Charged Beams versus the Season 4 Sweepers. And I'm going to take the Season 4 Sweepers again. For the 4th week in a row, I think that they have the makings of a really good matchup. And I actually really like their setup into this Torkoal Heavy Sun team. Though I think that they probably have even less speed control than the Charged Beams do, I don't think that this is necessarily the backbreaker that it was for the Flareons, where because the Flareons couldn't match Tailwinds or prevent JKG from setting up Tailwind, that they ended up losing because their offense couldn't keep up. I think that 616 doesn't have this issue. I think that they definitely can keep up or even change the pace of the battle without needing to match the speed control necessarily. That being said, if 616 makes the mistake of setting up Trick Room, this could go very poorly for 616. I don't think that he should do that though. Moving into the Light Division, we have the Booming Swamperts versus the Sunset Rose Meowsticks. I'm going to take the Meowsticks here. I don't think that this is a super one-sided affair. Of course, Heatran and Brute Bonnet are really big pain in the butt for Rose's team, and I do think that they can provide a lot of issues, but I think that especially in the last week where they went against the anti-Perish Trap Pokemon and still came out on top, that fills me with a lot of confidence in this team to actually make a really good game plan against the Booming Swamperts here, and I do think that they should probably be favored here. I wouldn't be surprised if this goes to 3 games though, as like I said, the Pokemon quality for the Booming Swamperts definitely can present a couple of issues, but I do favor Rose in this situation. Next up, we have the Infernal Infernates versus the Calgary Flareons. I'm going to take the Infernates here. This is kind of just off of experience. I do think that this is kind of a 50-50 matchup on paper. There are good matchups on both sides, and I think it'll just come down to prep work and, of course, playing in the game, which unfortunately I do think leads me to lean towards BigBot. BigBot has kind of proven that when they're not second-guessing themselves, they have the ability to really overwhelm teams and just stick to a game plan that really works. So hopefully BigBot is able to do that, but I also think that Celadon could potentially upset here. This is probably the game that I'm feeling the least confident about for this week of predictions. And finally, in the light division, we have the Cretaceous Draco Meteors versus the New York Poke Rangers. I'm going to take the Draco Meteors here. I think that the Pokemon quality is a lot higher on the Draco Meteors, and I also think that the matchup's pretty one-sided. I see that Raging Bolt is honestly oppressive in this matchup. Um, and on top of that, I think a defensive Terra basically makes this unwinnable for the Poke Rangers. Now, nothing's absolutely unwinnable, but I do think that this is a situation where Dale is going to be in the driver's seat basically the whole time, and it will require Dale to misplay. And I think it will require perfect play out of Ada in order to get the victory that he's looking for. So honestly, if we do see a Poke Rangers win, that's a replay to go back and watch to see how that masterclass was actually played. But I am going to take Dale here, as I don't think that Dale is capable of making that many mistakes. Of the matchups, I think that this is the most one-sided, but it's still a game that could go either way. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the standings for the end of week number 3. A lot of parity around the league so far. It looks like, of course, the light division does have a few more wins, but it is still a very close 5-team race there. I think, of course, your top 4 are definitely favored going into playoffs. I wouldn't hate anyone that predicts that these teams actually making it, any of those top 4 teams. I think that there's a pretty sizable lead for the Draco Meteors, so they're probably pretty locked in. But I think any of the next 3 can take up those last 2 spots. Of course, the Booming Swampers are still in the race, and so are the Flareons. And I think turning their play around could definitely give them a playoff spot as well. So the playoff race is not over by any means. Over in the Dark Division, as we kind of talked about, the Sweepers 10-star team do have a pretty sizable lead, but I think that even the 10-star team's position is pretty fragile. There's 3 teams right on their heels, including ourselves, and I think if 10-star continues to play this unchanging strategy that doesn't adapt, they could be in a little bit of trouble. 616 does have a sizable enough lead that I think they'll probably make playoffs just off of the strength of their early season start, but I don't think that they're going to take off the gas that quickly as well, and I think that they'll probably end up making playoffs, still looking really solid. Last thing we want to look at is, of course, the stats so far. A lot of really great Pokemon putting out a lot of great performances so far, and we see our first crossing the threshold of double-digit KOs with both Goldengo and Primarina. Goldengo, of course, getting 14 and Primarina getting 12, with Dragonite, Hearthflame, Basculegion, and Hariyama right on their tails with 9, 8, and 7 respectively. Going around the league, of course, the teams that are performing the best do have a lot of the best numbers, but you can also see that a couple of these teams have more concentration in their higher picks than others. Of course, one thing to call out is, of course, you see 4 Bewares in the top 19, which does kind of hint at the fact that there is a upper echelon of the Bewares, but it is still spread out really evenly, or it's not like 3 Pokemon that are all supporting 1 Pokemon, whereas for the 10-star team, I would say it's basically the Goldengo and Incineroar show, and not a whole lot going on for the 10-star team. Similar to also the Poke Rangers, where it is Staraptor and Hearthflame actually, the top 2, with Fluttermane kind of being left in the shadows there. But, you know, there are, of course, a couple of Pokemon down here that you wouldn't expect to be down here. A lot of the Duo Blades, I think, can turn this around. So hopefully we will see a better performance out of them. A lot of support Pokemon kind of hanging out in this lower region, but still a lot of rising stars as well, as we do see things like Raging Bolt and Chien-Pao starting to finally move up in the rankings. And of course, Ursaluna Blood Moon does have a really huge jump, going from 0 to 4 KOs. Does drop them, does raise them from this like mid 60s and 70s area to top 25. So with all of that being said, that is what I got for you for this week 3 recap. a lot of really good stuff going on so far and a lot of good stuff to look forward to. So hopefully you stay tuned for all of that, and I hope you continue to cheer on your Manchester Beavers for our Season 4 run, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.